preview dialers are a specific use case. They are a very low volume dialer, meaning few people are called in a short period of time, but they are a high touch dialer. And we'll kind of talk about some of the advantages of a preview dialer here in just a moment, but I wanted to kind of go over the basic attributes of this classification of dialer. Again, the dialer calls all of the people, but unlike a power dialer, the first person that answers the phone is the agent. It's not going to be a pre-recorded message or a text-to-speech message, which is common of a power dialer, although our power dialer cheats and can do some predictive dialing where it ends up at an agent is the first person to answer the phone. But as a general category, what's common to all preview dialers is that a human being answers the phone. And some use cases. This is important. Existing customers is a typical use of a preview dialer. Let me give you an example. In fact, our preview dialer, which we call Surveyor, and I'll show you in just a moment, was written specifically for Minneapolis Star Tribune, which is a large regional newspaper out of Minnesota. And they have a lot of people that they need to call on a regular basis. And one of the things that I never really realized about newspapers is that they don't make their money from selling newspapers directly. Where they really make their money is on the advertisements that go into the newspaper. So could you imagine a scenario where somebody who has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars advertising in the newspaper gets a robocall saying, what would you like to advertise this to tomorrow? That would be kind of insulting. Wouldn't you feel insulted that you weren't important enough to actually get a dedicated salesman to call me on the phone and work with me on how I'm going to advertise? So in this scenario, what we need to do is make sure that it's a human being that they're connected to, and that when they answers the phone, there's a human being at the end of that telephone line every single time. Unlike a predictive dialer, where you can call somebody and hope there's an agent available and that the predictive, in quotation marks, guessed right, or you can use a preview dialer. So let's talk about some of the other uses of a preview dialer. You can use a preview dialer oftentimes in conjunction with a power dialer. So let's take a collection activity, for example. The first time you try and get the person to pay, we're going to use a power dialer that says, this is a call for Matthew, this is your local cable company, you're 28 days past due, your outstanding balance is $350. If you've already made a payment, press 1. If you need to talk to a billing specialist, press 2. Well, as soon as they hear the message, it's the collections company, they hang up. I don't want to talk to them. I don't have the money to pay it, right? So you've tried a couple of times with the power dialer. That didn't work. Now let's try a human being. So now when they answer the phone, instead of them hanging up on an IVR, now they're hanging up on a human being. So when they answer, a human being says, hey, this is Matthew from the cable company. I really need to talk to you about your outstanding balance. Can you help me out here? We've been trying to get a hold of you and haven't been able to get you on the phone. So you can use a preview dialer in conjunction with a power dialer as the second effort to get that. But what if the agent needs to have a little background about this person? How many times did we try and call them? What were the commitments that were previously made? What's their annual income? Are there other people in the household that are employed? Those kinds of information, so that when they say, oh, no, I don't have any money, well, you told us last Thursday that you were going to make a payment. Now it's Monday. We still haven't got a payment. You didn't follow through with your commitment. So having some background about what happened is useful, and that's why they call it a preview dialer, because the agent is presented all the background information about the person that they're about to talk with, so that when they answer the phone, they can, in a positive scenario, talk to the person like they're best buddies. Okay, so again, some of the advantages is that there's always going to be a human being at the other end of that phone when that person answers the phone, and the agent knows all about the customer before the customer answers the phone. I mentioned that this is a low volume dialer, and I think oftentimes when people look at dialers, one of the things that's in the back of their mind is that a dialer is going to help me make a zillion more calls than I could make if my agents are dialing it themselves. And that's true. But I want to make sure that when we talk about the context of a preview dialer and the fact that it makes a lower volume number of calls than a predictive or a power dialer, that we don't lose sight of one important fact. And that is the ultimate goal of using the dialer to make a lot of telephone calls, or is it really to have a successful interaction with the customer? A sale, for example. And I think we would all agree that the whole point of this exercise is to get a sale, not how many telephone calls we make. And so if the interaction between the agent and the contact is a much more favorable conversation, you're much more likely to have a positive end result. All right, so we've been talking about previews. Let's talk a little bit about our preview dialer. Again, this is our Surveyor tool. This is our preview dialer. I have often said that I really ought to change the name of this product to 3CX Preview Dialer. I think people will understand what it is a lot better if I change the name. So you might find that this product in the next little while has a name change from 3CX Surveyor to 3CX Preview Dialer. But in any case, let's talk a little bit about a preview dialer. So the first thing that you would do, let me collapse this so we have a little more screen space too. So the first thing we would do, like the power dialer, is we would set up a campaign. And so I've already created a campaign here, and I've created a list inside that campaign. And let's take a look at it. So I just give the list a name, again, a start date and an end date, much like we did with the power dialer. We can set it as active or inactive. You might want to set it at inactive if you're setting this all up in advance, but you're not quite ready to make it available to your agents. And then when you're ready to make it to your agent, you simply send it to active, and now they'll get access to it. You might have a script that the agent is supposed to read. So this is a test script. So you can put pictures, you can do fonts, you can do colors, you can make this as fancy as you want, but typically this is a bullet list of items that the agent is supposed to remember to talk to the contact about, or it could be an exact script that says, hello, Mr. Brown, this is Matthew Orr, I'm calling you about blah, 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 right? Here, we've taken this one a little step further in its development than we did with the power dialer. I should probably change this, but here I don't need to know SQL syntax at all. So I can add additional criteria, and it knows all of the fields that I can select from. So I've said that the state is Wisconsin, and what else do I have here? Do we have a contain? Let's see, and company name. Company begins with the letter V. And I'm going to apply that. And now it's filtered this list to only show those people where the company name starts with V. I didn't need to know anything about SQL syntax for creating this query against the repository of people that I'm supposed to call. So it's a little bit easier in this tool, but this is how you identify who you're going to call. And again, it has an import screen that's identical to the Power Dialer's import screen, so we won't go over that again. And then you assign agents to this campaign. So you can see right now that Samuel and I are both listed in this campaign. This means that you can have as many agents as you want working against the same campaign at the same time. That's fine, no problem. Or you can set up a separate campaign for each agent. It's up to you how that works. All right, so we save the changes, and that's how you create a campaign. So manager does this up front. When he's all ready to go, he says, okay, call center staff, go in and start using the campaign. So when they log in, because they're not managers, the only menu option they'll see is dialer and about. They won't be able to see these other settings. That's also true, by the way, for the Power Dialer, is that the ability to create campaigns and manipulate campaigns is restricted to managers in 3CX. So again, we're all very directly tied into 3CX. When you log in, you see that I've logged in as extension 1001. When I put in my username and password, it's going out to 3CX and it's verifying my credentials and checking to see if I'm a 3CX admin or a 3CX manager or just a plain user. And based on that information that's returned by 3CX, it will restrict what I can see within the Power Dialer. So if I were logged in as just a user, the only thing that I could do is go in here to the dialer screen. So they come into the dialer screen and they will go in here and say, well, what campaigns have I been assigned to? Okay, so I've been assigned to this campaign. And within that campaign are potentially one or more lists. So let's see what list I've been assigned to. Okay, so I click on that, and what it does is it goes through and it finds the first person that I'm supposed to call. And so typically what happens is I will then press the dial button and my phone will ring and I will answer my phone and I will hear on hold music while 3CX is attempting to contact this person who's Matthew or whose telephone number is this. Actually, that's not my telephone number, but you get the idea. Now, some of this is a little bit hard to read on this particular monitor. This is a little bit grayer than perhaps I'd like. But the reason this is gray is because the manager has gone in and identified what fields I'm allowed to change and which ones I'm not. And I'll show you how the interface for controlling those kinds of things. But basically, here's the telephone number that it's going to dial. While the phone is ringing, I'm reading history information. So if there's a priority note in here, it'll be in bold red letters, customers on credit hold or something like that. In addition to that, I'll see notes that were entered into the system from previous calls to this customer. So I can see history of all of the contacts that happened to that person, what commitments were made if this was a campaign for collections, that kind of thing, right? So I can do things like find out when their first order was or last order. These are all fields that you can commandeer for your own purposes, and I'll show you in a minute how you commandeer these fields. If this one's a prior ad, this was written as a widget specifically for Minneapolis Star Tribune. They wanted to know what was the last advertisement that that person put into the magazine. Well, I'm not a magazine, so I don't need this widget, so I'm going to get rid of it. And you'll notice that the widget then comes up here and it becomes available again. right? So if I don't need a particular widget, or if I don't need a script, remember that script that we used to create the campaign, and I told you in there that it said this is a test script. There's that test script right here. So this would be the bullet list of things to remember to talk about. If this is a cold call and I don't have specific things I need to talk to the customer, I could get rid of that too. And now I can reorganize my screen a little bit. That's kind of cool. This is a web page, and yet I can drag widgets around on the screen and I can resize them. If I put that script back on here, now I can take the whole screen. I got some real estate left on my screen. Let's make it bigger so that I can see more of my script at a time. Or maybe I want to see the script first, and I'll look at the other stuff later. So I can customize these widgets that are displayed and what order they're displayed and what size they are, and save them by clicking on this button here. And it will save that layout, and it's unique to each person, so they can set it up the way that they like to work. And if I want to set it back to a default, you can hit that. Okay, so the idea here is that when that person answers the phone, I know what ads they placed yesterday, or I know whether or not they're a homeowner, what they, so here's another widget for pre-qualifying, and this was a widget that we created for a solar company in Australia, and these were specific things that they needed to know to pre-qualify the person. And so it's got menu options here, like yes, no, yes, no. Are these all yes, no? Oh, no, less than 3 years. So you can control what the labels are for all of these widgets and for what data shows up in these combo boxes. If you need a custom widget, as you can see, I've created a couple of them specific to customers. But most people find that we've got a widget that meets their needs, and they can commandeer the fields forever they want. So you could, for example, this in the contacts widget, you'll see that it has a company, an owner, a buyer, and a receptionist. Well, you might instead want to make this head of household, spouse, whatever you want to. They're just text fields, so you can put in here whatever you want. So there's some customization that's available. In any case, now when the person answers the phone, you can say, "Hi, Bob. How's your wife?" I read in the notes that your wife is going back to college. So now when he answers the phone, I can say, "Hey, Bob, how's school going for your wife?" And now Bob thinks that I know who he is. In reality, I'm calling 10,000 people. I couldn't possibly know all these people. But because I look at some of the history about this person, I can talk to this person as if we're best buddies. And now we're having a much more pleasant, positive conversation. So if I'm a newspaper and I've got a customer that spent $100,000 advertising, I sure as heck better give the impression that I know who they are and know a little bit about them. So that's some of the value positions of a preview dialer. Okay, so the call is ended. I've added some more notes in here about the call. Yeah, we had a great call. He agreed to do a full page spread in tomorrow's newspaper, sample advertisement documents to follow, something like that. Now that becomes part of the history that I can then review over time. But what happened to the call? There's also the ability to disposition that telephone call. So you see, I called this number and that number no longer works. Or I called that number and the phone was busy. Or whatever kind of disposition you want. These are not fixed. These are optional. It goes into a database and looks at the dispositions that you've created. So you have control over all these dispositions, but they can't go to the next person they're supposed to call until they've dispositioned the call. Well, let's say I called somebody and the wife answers the phone and says, "Oh, my husband's away right now, but he'll be back at 6 o'clock." So if you want to call him at 6 o'clock on his cell phone, okay, so I'm going to change this to 6 o'clock, right? So I set a date and time for the callback. And then what was his cell phone number? Oh, okay, cool. I'll call him back. So now we have a date and time for that callback. When I press next to say who's the next person I'm supposed to call, and remember, multiple agents potentially working on the same campaign. What Surveyor does is it looks at the list of people that it's supposed to call, and the first thing it does is it checks to see if there are any scheduled callbacks. And if that scheduled callback time, date and time has arrived, it'll display that person next rather than the next person that was in this long list of people that I'm supposed to call. So that's how callbacks work. Well, what if I get a voicemail box when I call somebody on the phone? I could just hang up, but then they wouldn't know that, hey, Mr. Big Advertiser, I tried to get a hold of you to get your next advertisement in the newspaper. Now I can leave a message, but leaving a message is time consuming, and it's kind of tedious. And I have a tendency to kind of fumble around when I'm leaving messages. I wish that I could just create a pre-recorded message that says, "Hi, this is Matthew from Minneapolis Star Tribune. I'm sorry I missed you. I'd like to get in contact so that we could organize the next advertisement that you have in the newspaper. If you have a few minutes, if you could call me back at 801-642-4655, blah, 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 whatever you wanted to say." So what we've built into Surveyor is this thing called auto voicemail. And unfortunately, I don't have any samples in here. I should probably get some samples in here. But in here would be a list of pre-recorded voicemails that I recorded with my own voice. And it knows who I am because that's who logged in up here, right? So it's only going to display those pre-recorded voicemails that I've created. So I select the correct voicemail. If I want to hear it before I use it to make sure I've selected the right one, I can press the play button and listen to it before I send it. Or I can just select the right voicemail and press send. And it will immediately disconnect me from the call. So now I can go make another telephone call to someone else. But at the same time, 3CX is then leaving that voicemail for that customer. So I get full credit for that telephone call. The customer knows that I've tried to get in contact with them. They're instructed to call me back. So it's not a wasted telephone call if I get a voicemail box, but I didn't have to sit there taking the time to figure out, okay, well, what should I say in this voicemail? It's just click it and move on. I've got another tool, and I don't see it on the screen. You have to independently install these on the system because auto voicemail is a separate product that we've happened to also integrate that product into Surveyor. And we have another tool called Caller ID. And maybe nobody's installed it on this machine, but the idea here is that I'm going to make a telephone call to California or maybe to New York or maybe to South Africa. I don't know where I'm calling, but I look at this person's address and I go, oh, they're in California. Maybe their telephone number is a Wisconsin telephone number, but maybe they're actually in California. So when I call them, I want the caller ID to be local to where the person is that I'm calling. So I would select from a list of telephone numbers, a telephone number that is local to Sacramento, California, if I'm calling into Sacramento, California. And then when I press the dial button, it's going to present that local telephone number to the contact rather than a New York telephone number. Because I think you'll agree, if I get a call on my cell phone and it says that it's a caller from New York City, I know I don't know anybody in New York City. So there's only one possibility, and that is that this is a sales marketing call and I don't want to talk to that person. So I'm going to reject the telephone call, and then I'm going to report them as a spammer to my carrier. And now they can't call me ever again, but they also can't call anybody else because too many people have reported them to the carrier. So having control over the caller ID is really important when you're calling outside of your local geographic area. So that's another feature that's built into Surveyor. Again, we have reports. So there's a performance report that shows how many calls the agent has made. There's a sales report that shows how many sales they've made. There's a general call report. It's complaining because I made changes but didn't save them, but we're going to do it anyway. I don't have any example data, but you can see who was called, their telephone number, when, date, time, and it's easy to find them again. So much like the power dialer, it's super easy to group these people by campaign, by state, by whatever you want to do, simply by grabbing these fields and pulling them up. So nice reporting built into Surveyor. Again, it also has a little database built into it. You can search for them quite easily. So if I go in here and I say, find me a customer whose company name starts with a V, I go in there and there we go, we'll find a customer, and then I can add information about it. I can see history of all the notes that were taken about that person. I can see if they qualify for additional calls. So that's kind of what this guy is all about. So it's got a mini CRM built into it too. Again, super basic. It's just enough that if you have no CRM, you can keep track of all your contacts and all the conversations that happened with them. So now when a customer calls you, you can look them up in this database and see the history that's taken place with that person. Yeah, I was supposed to pay for my cable service and I just got paid, so I want to get paid. Okay, cool. Then let's put in here, he made his payment today, right? Save, and it knows who I am, so it's going to specify the date and time that the note was done and who saved the note. All right, and so that's kind of, in a nutshell, what Surveyor is all about. It's a preview dialer. I know all about that customer before it's dialed. I don't make a lot of telephone calls in comparison to a predictive dialer or a power dialer, but remember, the goal is not how many telephone calls I can make in a day. The goal is how many sales I can make in a day. And so for many organizations, a preview dialer is much more appropriate than a power dialer or a predictive dialer, but they can be used in conjunction with each other.